Tonight on the South Bank Show, Bond, James Bond.
Hello, Mr. Bond, I've been expecting you. Martini in your hand, and that eyebrow that you move. Don't take this the wrong way, I know it might sound odd. I'm the next 00, I'm the right man for the job. So I wish I was James Bond, just for the day, kissing all the girls, blow the bad guys away.
You're looking extraordinarily composed and that, but there's a lot of it is running, fighting, jumping.
I'm just trying to keep it together to talk to you, I think that's what it is. I suppose I just made a decision early on, rightly or wrongly, whether or not when I got involved, was that I wanted to be as physically involved as I possibly could. I enjoy it. I get a big kick out of it. It's a physical, demanding role.
The more you're involved in those physical sides, does it make you feel you've got a bigger grip on the part?
It makes me feel sore. That's basically all it does. Bond has always been something incredibly physical in my mind. Sean's movies were dynamic and balletic almost, the way the sort of the violence and the action was done. And I thought I want to be involved with that. I want to be involved with that at every level, because it's crucially important. It's what people go to the movie to watch.
The essence of it for me was always to make everything look easy, simple, so that when there was any movement, it was kind of important. It was a message that something was coming. When you take somebody on physically to be able to do the dance is the movement. Like with Diamonds Are Forever, and we'd whole choreographed fight in an elevator. Made one mistake, baff, and it was him and not me, thank God. And he knocked the window out.
For me, it was the styles of the movie, the way they looked, the feeling that they gave off. To my father's generation, it was very much a post-war thing. It's someone coming along who defined a generation, or at least gave hope to a generation that was feeling particularly battered and bruised after the Second World War. And then along came this lone hero. And it was Sean, and it was, this magnificent man who just, that's the person every male wanted to be.
Stop! Look! He's gunning for trouble. 007. It spells Bond.
Shocking.
I think ever since the movies first appeared on the screens in the 60s, they created a new kind of cinematic genre, and I think that has lasted for several decades. And often you'll pick up the newspaper and they'll refer to a villain as being someone who's Bondian, or some extraordinary piece of architecture that looks like it could be on a Bond set.
Action!
I think it's very flattering to all the people who originally started this series, my father, Cubby Broccoli, and his partner, Harry Saltzman, and obviously Ken Adam, who's an extraordinary designer.
This is the design of the interior of the volcano, which is the headquarters of our villain.
The 60s and late 50s was a renaissance of all the arts in this country, and Bond was one part of it. The 60s were when the British took off their handcuffs and said, fuck, the empire, it doesn't exist any longer. Now we will take over. And so I let myself go, and always tongue-in-cheek, but tried to reflect the era that we were living in and maybe slightly ahead, of that time.
$1 million, Mr. Bond.
In a way, I think Dr. No set the style for the rest of the Bond films.
Underneath the mango tree, my honey and me.
Where's that?
It's all right. I'm not supposed to be here either. I take it you're not. Are you alone?
What are you doing here? Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking.
Why do you think Dr. No was such a phenomenal success?
Well, I think the timing is always the case with movies, and it did come along at the end of the kind of kitchen sink dramas. It was still a bad time in Britain, not great. So many people identified with somebody getting away with all these dollies and the food and a matter of killing. Well, you're licensed to kill. I think it's a side of it that's it's very much a fantasy. And I still get stuff, sent to me, and, notes and sexiest man alive and all that stuff.
Miss Moneypenny, give 007 the password we've agreed with Japanese SIS.
Yes, sir. We tried to think of something that you wouldn't forget.
Yes.
I love you. Repeat it, please, to make sure you get it.
Don't worry. I get it.
It's the most extraordinary part, Bond, to take on. World fame, almost from the beginning, and it being inhabited by several other actors. How did that affect your thinking when they asked you to do Bond?
I said no. Honestly, I came along and I thought it was a very nice joke. I mean, I thought it was a nice idea and something to go and discuss, and certainly I felt honoured that they should even think about me, but it just wasn't on the cards.
What really tipped the balance then?
Really, it came down to, and it was my own decision. I obviously took counsel with everybody, with every friend and every relative that would listen. If I didn't do it, how would I feel in 10 years' time? And that was just I couldn't live with myself.
What makes Daniel so accessible is that he's a cracking good actor, and he looks wonderful. I mean, you can say this about nearly all the Bonds, can't you? All good actors, and they all look wonderful. And I'm lucky enough to boss them around. It was the same, I think, for Pierce. The responsibility of playing James Bond seems to me to be unbelievably onerous. People feel very proprietorial about James Bond, so everybody has their own ideas about him.
Good afternoon, ma'am. We're doing a complete forensic analysis of every note in its traceable history.
Quantum of Solace is the first Bond film whose story directly follows on from the previous Bond movie, in which Vesper, a woman Bond loved, died.
You look like hell. When's the last time you slept? Vesper's boyfriend, Yusuf Kabira, the one who was abducted in Morocco, the one she was trying to save, his body was washed up on a beach in Ibiza. We're meant to believe the fish did that to his face. His wallet and ID were in his pocket.
Oh, that's convenient.
Quite. Which is why I did a DNA check on a lock of his hair found in Vesper's apartment. It's not him.
A lock of his hair. I wouldn't have thought Vesper the sentimental type.
We never really know anyone, do we? But I do need to know, Bond. I need to know that I can trust you.
And you don't?
Well, it'd be a pretty cold bastard who didn't want revenge for the death of someone he loved.
You don't have to worry about me. I'm not going to go chasing him. He's not important. And neither was she.
Directing a Bond film is something very different than doing another project, another film. In a sense, you know, there's obviously the scale, and the film has been 5 times bigger than any other films I have done before. Obviously, it comes with this incredible, huge fan base. You have Bond, you have the villains, you have the girls. You have sort of all the framework of Ian Fleming's Bond in that sense. It was important for me to pay homage to some of the older films from the 60s, which I really loved, like Goldfinger or Your Majesty's Secret Service or Dr. No. But at the same time, you create something new, different, and cutting edge.
Mr. Bond, my name is Fields. I'm from the consulate.
Well, of course you are. What do you do at the consulate, Fields?
That's not important. My orders are to turn you around and put you on the first plane back to London.
Those orders include my friend Mathis.
I'm sorry, I don't know who you are.
You see that? Gone such a short time, already forgotten.
You're just saying that to hurt me.
Mr. Bond, these orders come from the highest possible authority.
Taxi? Fields? When is the next flight to London?
Tomorrow morning.
Well, then we have all night.
If you attempt to flee, I will arrest you, drop you off in jail, and take you to the plane in chains. Understand?
Perfectly. After you.
I think she has handcuffs.
I do hope so. I just said, well, this is the way I'm going to do it. I have to do it like this. I have to react to what this man is going through because I find that interesting. And that's because that's where I come from. That's the type of movies I enjoy. I'm going to apply that method. But there was no sort of deep sort of character analysis. I mean, I wish sort of there had been. I could talk to you about it for hours, but I wanted to see him get sort of knocked back. I wanted to add the idea that he could go down.
Take the blue combi pen, Bond. Mid-neck, into the vein. That'll counteract the digitalis.
You're going to pass out in a few seconds and you need to keep your heart going. Push the red button now, Bond.
Bond, push the damn button.
Do it now!
There's always an attempt to kind of make him vulnerable and make him fallible. We did that with The World Is Not Enough in a small way, that he gets injured at the start of the movie, and he's also brought a bomb back that's blown someone up at MI6, so he's sort of fairly fallible. It was really with Casino Royale that we had the opportunity to show him as a properly vulnerable and very fallible. That was because you have a new actor and you have a new beginning.
But also, I mean, the very beginning of the film, that he's just running, was just his sheer force. You know, no gadgets, no cars or anything. And he's not as good as the guy he's chasing. But, you know, he sorts it out in the end. He's not superhuman, but he's still better than everybody.
On Casino Royale, there was a sort of testing going on. The stunt department wanted to see how much I was capable of doing and how much we could do safely. And I think I probably pushed it too far because I seem to be doing an awful lot more in this movie.
I have a license, I have a license, I have a license to thrill. I have a license, I have a license, I have a license to kill. I have a license, I have a license, I have a license to thrill.
Every time we sort of look at a new scene and all that, it's like, right, how can we do this for real? Daniel's very keen to get in front of the camera so the audience can see that it's him. He doesn't want to cheat the audience. There's certain films that you can go into the surreal world where it's unbelievable, and that's fine, but James Bond films, the audience want to believe what they're seeing can be done for real.
And I wish I was James Bond.
As long as Ian Fleming's kind of idea of it is basically there, it is something which lasts. He has to be real, but he has to be also a kind of fantasy person, that kind of, in a way, I don't mean this in a rude way, but that kind of comic strip quality about it has to be there. But at the same time, he's got to be a real person. Times have changed and we expect different things now.
How much oil did the Americans promise you?
This isn't about oil.
Well, that's good, because there isn't any.
It's about trust. You said you weren't motivated by revenge.
I'm motivated by my duty.
No. I think you're so blinded by inconsolable rage that you don't care who you hurt. When you can't tell your friends from your enemies, it's time to go.
We live in a time when people are a bit anxious about what's going on, and I think the Daniel Craig's interpretation, we found a Bond suited to our time.
He's reinvented James Bond for this generation. He's extraordinarily versatile. He's very sexy, and he has that kind of animal magnetism. When he decided to do this film and take this on, he said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it all the way. And he gave us a commitment.
When you were named for the part, there was an extraordinary outburst from Bond fans on the internet and from some critics saying, no, 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 and all sorts of things. Your hair was the wrong colour, and that must have hurt.
I was knocked for six by it. Obviously, I was knocked for six by it, but it gave me a resolve. It gave me a resolve which was to do with, I just thought, well, that's as hard as it's going to be. If we get it right, that it's all going to be fine. So I need to concentrate on getting it right. I went through this sort of deep, dark sort of, literally for sort of 24 hours and just went, okay, how do I deal with this? And came out the other side, looked around me and just went, you know what? The only way forward is to create something very memorable, and if it doesn't work, I'll move on.
But what satisfaction when the film came out and it was the rave reviews and the first time Bond had got an award and stuff. You must have enjoyed that.
I enjoyed it, of course I enjoyed it. But that sort of would make me think that I'd been feeling like that since that happened. And I kind of got over it by then. I literally got over it. So by the time the BAFTA nomination came around and all that sort of thing, I was on another sort of, I was somewhere else completely.
But it's still satisfying.
Very satisfying.
Ian Fleming set out to write what he called the spy story to end all spy stories. With the creation of British secret agent 007, he began a series of best-selling novels.
Spying has always been regarded as a very romantic one-man job, so to speak, one man against the whole police force or an army. The books have pace and plenty of action. His task is a straightforward one, and he goes for it in a fairly straightforward fashion. And I meant for warm-blooded, heterosexual adults, and I think people like the action.
As you read the books, if you read them in order, you feel him sort of fall in love with James Bond, and then he starts to hate him, and then he kills him off, and then he brings him back again. And that in itself is the fascinating part about reading them. You can see him struggling with the character, and I enjoyed that about reading the books again.
The success of Fleming's James Bond novels caught the attention of Hollywood producers Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli.
My father was attracted to this material because I think he felt that Bond was a sort of classic hero. And he and his partner Harry Saltzman knew from the very beginning that this was going to be a film series. I mean, they had total certainty in that.
Okay, let's shoot it. Yeah, after the kids, let him have his main speech.
I suppose you know that industrial secrets are big business.
Harry had some of the rights to the Bond films, and he formed this partnership with Cubby, who was a much more realistic businessman who knew how to raise money and so on. And they formed a very interesting partnership. Cubby was one of the boys, always. Harry came from a background of circus. He was bubbling over with ideas all the time. So, in fact, they made a very good team.
At the time, a lot of the British characters were thought of as being eccentric, and they thought they'd just cut it completely the opposite way. They make a man who is strong, tough, decisive. And that's what they saw in the books, and that's what they brought to the screen.
Now the most extraordinary gentleman spy in all fiction becomes a flesh and blood experience in the kind of breathtaking adventure that only Ian Fleming could create.
Some people didn't think Sean Connery was appropriate. They wanted to have a smoother character, but he turned out to be just perfect for the role.
Cubby and I went through, I would say, 200 actors. I like the way he moved, and the fact that he had a lot of acting experience. But he moves extremely well. There's only one other actor who moves as well as he is, Albert Finney. They move like cats.
He's suave and he's smooth and he can soothe you like vanilla. The gentleman's a killer, Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
According to the books, Bond was upper class background, he was snobbish, and so on and so forth. What did you feel about taking that world on?
Well, I never got introduced to Fleming until I was well into the movie, but I know he was not that happy with me as a choice. He called me, or told somebody that I was a overdeveloped stuntman. He never said it to me.
I bet he didn't.
But when I did eventually meet him, very interesting, erudite, and a snob, a real snob. But his company was very good for a limited time for me. The director, Terence Young, understood that whole world and adored it, but he also understood the game of the dress and what you wore, what you didn't wear. He went and ordered these suits and the tie, the blazer. And I'm fortunate in that if I'm wearing anything that's reasonable, it looks reasonably good.
May we call your attention to Mr. Bond's impeccable tailoring from London's Savile Row? The shirt is of hand-tailored Indian madras. Also the cravat, hand-woven of Javanese batik.
Were you surprised when you got the part?
I was, yes. Yeah.
Why is that? You'd done an awful lot of stuff, so why were you surprised?
Because it was going to be the leading role in the movie, and there was obviously going to be a sequence, if it was any success.
Dr. No and From Russia with Love were phenomenal hits at the box office. The third Bond film, Goldfinger, marked the onset of spy mania and sent the crowd wild at its world premiere in Leicester Square.
It was fantastic. And I mean, he was so glamorous. I was quite excited myself walking back with that damn Goldfinger. And the plate glass window was pushed in the cinema. It was really so overexciting. Harry Saltzman always used to say, when people leave the cinema, the women go out lusting after Sean, as it was in those days, and the men go out walking tall.
Discipline 007. Discipline.
John Barry, who wrote the music for Goldfinger, I mean, he said, I think everything came together in Goldfinger.
Well, anything goes in a Bond song, in a Bond movie. So it was easy to do. The songs fit in really easy. And so the thing I always used to do was set the title first. You know, get that in something that was attractive.
Goldfinger.
I remember when Shirley sang Goldfinger, she said, what's Goldfinger? I said, Shirley, just go out there and sing your off. Okay, that's all you have to know. And that's what she did.
It's the kiss of death from Mr. Goldfinger.
I remember when George Lazenby became on board, I thought, well, this is not Laurence Olivier we got here. So I overemphasized on Majesty's Secret Service. Went right over the top to make sure those elements were really in your face. And I think it worked.
There hadn't been anything like that before. Blatty, dirty trombones and kind of rasping trumpets and a certain kind of attitude, you know, a kind of dark, twisted attitude. What the best ones do. I think the idea is that you just try and do it with as much, well, for me, as much respect for the history of it as I can, knowing that we try and inch it forward a little bit every time.
We didn't settle on a price.
Make me an offer.
We can work it out later. Over drinks. Dominic didn't give you any trouble, did he?
No.
What the hell is this?
I think someone wants to kill you.
There is a business of this being a new Bond. He's sometimes rather a cruel representation and means. He does things that you think, that's one of the new things you brought to it.
I never wanted to apologise for who he is. The strength of him was the fact that his decision-making was done at the moment, in the moment, and that's what makes it exciting. And he can be wrong.
As I understand it, you saw a lot of the films, or all of the films, 2 or 3 times, and then you put them aside and said, I'll go where I'll go. What were you doing when you were seeing this one? Were you exercising the people who'd been before? Were you
probably looking for stuff that we could use, that I felt that was useful, that was something that defined it. So I wanted to immerse myself in it so I wasn't missing anything, so that I could become a part of it. But I think that if I was being honest, if you look at Bonds since the 60s, they've either been sort of completely on the nose of their time, or completely so out of sync with their time that they're incredibly camp and wonderful.
Roger was good in a completely different way. He wasn't the sportsman, the macho that Sean was, but he was maybe more sophisticated and a great sense of humor.
The key!
Try the big one. Can you play any other tunes?
The films became bigger, and bigger budgets too. So with The Spy Who Loved Me, I decided to build a stage, which was the 007 stage, and then put the set inside it.
Nobody does it better.
And when you see the film again, and you see Barbara Bach being rescued by Roger, we had enormous amount of water pumped into this corridor, and Barbara went completely hysterical. I've never seen her so frightened in my... And that comes out in the film.
I think somewhere around when I was about 7 or 8, I suddenly realized that James Bond wasn't a real person, because he was talked about all the time as if he was some sort of distant uncle or someone who was imminently arriving. Ian Fleming wrote a very complex character, a character that has been able to be portrayed by many different actors and through several generations, through all times, you know, starting from the Cold War through 9/11. Through all of these episodes in life, James Bond has always been there.
When the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War seemed to be over, many people said to us, well, I guess that's the end of James Bond. But Barbara and I said, well, it seems to me the world is more in need of James Bond than ever.
seconds to impact.
In the 60s when Bond started, you know, you had the Cold War, you had the good guys and the bad guys. The villains were very clearly defined. Today it gets much more complicated. There's not, I would say, a pure villain anymore. The lines become much more blurry between good and bad, and I think that's the interesting part. Is Bond as bad as the villain? Is the villain as good as Bond? It's interesting not to make the villain so cut clear, he's the bad guy.
We all have a dark, very, very dark side, everybody, so it's quite easy sometimes to feel close to the villain. A villain today doesn't have any scars anymore, or a white cat or a metal jaw. And also now, since Casino Royale, there's something different and much more ambiguous, is that the good and the bad are, in fact, inside James Bond himself.
How much do you know about Bond, Camille? Because he's rather a tragic case. His MI6 says he's difficult to control. Nice way of saying that everything he touches seems to wither and die.
Shall we?
Doesn't bode well for you, I'm afraid. You two do make a charming couple, though. You're both, what's the expression? Damaged goods?
I got a feeling it's automatic. I got a feeling it's
We're doing the promotion, and this photo shoot was for different magazines around the world. After doing a movie and a lot of stunts, you realize how, you know, this is more like a pleasure. The girl that plays in the James Bond movie, I mean, they're always, you know, glamorous, sexy girls. And I'm just very pleased to be part of it now, because it's kind of a, you know, once you did the movie, you stay in history.
You're quite a girl, Pussy.
I'm strictly the outdoor type.
I'd like to think you're not in all of this caper.
Skip it. I'm not interested. Let's go.
What would it take for you to see things my way?
A lot more than you've got.
How do you know?
I don't want to know.
Isn't it customary to grant the condemned man his last request?
You've asked for this. The implication is, being a Bond girl is one of those bimbos that took one look at Bond and fell flat on her back. And Pussy Galore was a character that I would like to have played in any film. And she certainly wasn't a bimbo. I mean, she was a character in her own right.
There was an attitude of us, I think it was right across the male population in many parts of towards women, which is the Bond girl fitted into that, the Bond girl. I mean, those two words themselves could scarcely be used now, and yet you had to sort of cope with that as an inheritance. Now, the one way you cope with it was that wonderful joke at the start in Casino Royale, where instead of Ursula Andress came out of the sea, you came out of the sea, which that was a good joke.
Well, yeah. I did. It was actually by accident as much as possible. I mean, don't believe me. I did actually. It was going through my mind when we did it. But where we filmed off the Bahamas, it's just one of those places where there's a sand shelf, and the sand shelf happens to be 3 feet deep. Because the idea is I was supposed to swim in and then sort of float off. But I swim in and stand up, and it just was one of those. And as I did it, I went, oh fuck. Here we go. And as soon as I did it, I knew that I didn't realize the repercussions of it. I had no idea that it was going to be sort of as, you know, goes. I'd be haunted by it for the rest of my life.
Bond is a romantic. Bond usually is on a mission which is complicated enough. And he usually ends up meeting an extraordinary woman who either gets in his way or helps him. And it always makes it a lot more complicated for him. When you begin Quantum of Solace, his heart is broken, and he encounters Camille, and they have quite an intensely emotional but brief encounter.
You lost somebody?
I did, yes.
You catch whoever did it?
No, not yet.
Tell me when you do. I'd like to know how it feels.
We should go. You ready?
During pre-production on GoldenEye, Martin Campbell, the director, and Bruce Fierstein, the writer, had decided that they were going to make M a woman. And they came to tell us in great trepidation because they were afraid of what we were going to say. And we actually thought it was a very, very good idea. There's a wonderful kind of chemistry between them. There's an undercurrent of frisson of sexuality about it. She is the only person who can actually tell him what to do.
I read the script and it was very, very funny. I thought it was very witty. And I thought, oh, hello, this is quite a different relationship suddenly you get with him because of being a woman.
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter, more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
The thought had occurred to me.
Good. Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War. Whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Point taken.
My husband said how absolutely thrilling living with a Bond woman. Oh dear. Living with a Bond woman at last. So that's what, you don't call them Bond girls. Oh, I'm very, very glad that you don't call them Bond girls anymore. Because it'd have had to change then. But they were called Bond women before I entered the frame, I think.
Now, having just met you, I wouldn't go as far as calling you a cold-hearted bastard.
No, of course not.
But it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine. You think of women as disposable pleasures rather than meaningful pursuits. So as charming as you are, Mr. Bond, I will be keeping my eye on our government's money and off your perfectly formed house.
You noticed.
Even accountants have imagination. How was your lamb?
Skewered. On sympathizers.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Good evening, Miss Lind.
That's the interesting part about Quantum of Solace. Where do we take Bond? What is the journey we take him on? The Bond films are sort of the crown jewel of British cinema. One has to play into that to a certain degree, and one has to play into the Britishness. That's the whole beauty about Bond. If you don't have that, it loses the charm, and the charm is something what makes Bond Bond.
He must have followed us.
I think you got the point.
It was more instinct than anything that if you were going to go into this world and be this extraordinary character, somehow you had to let them in on a secret or something that the Bond character is not such a shit, as it were. At the end of the day, it was to find humour for me, and it worked very well up to a point, you know.
What is fascinating about the Bond character is that he's fun, he's witty, he's dry, he's a killer, and you don't mind.
Well, it's surprisingly difficult to drive, but with practice...
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see how she responds to my touch, AQ.
Think we understand each other?
Grow up, 007. I think it should be quite funny.
I think that part of the charm of Bond is that it's witty and funny. I like particularly saying, "Christ, I miss the Cold War." You know, I love that line. And how the hell could Bond be so stupid? I give him 00 status and he celebrates by shooting up an embassy. Is the man deranged? And where the hell is he? In the old days, if an agent did something that embarrassing, he'd have the good sense to defect. Christ, I miss the Cold War. When I was asked to play M, I can only think of Bernard Lee, so I'm kind of copying him.
Dushka, tell me the truth. Am I as exciting as all those Western girls?
Oh, once when I was with Am in Tokyo, we had an interesting experience.
Thank you, Miss Moneypenny. That's all.
Bond's gone on now for 40 years and other actors have taken part. Why do you think its success is so enduring?
The ingredients are all there for the kind of movie that people want to see. It has very good entertaining value. For example, it's a spectrum of actors. I mean, from myself to Daniel Craig, who I thought was fantastic, marvellous in the part.
Daniel Craig said he saw all the films, but he took an immense amount from your films. I suppose nicked is a good word.
Yeah, well, I'm flattered. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's there to see, and it's the danger element, I think he really gets it.
Have you ever killed someone? The training will tell you that when the adrenaline kicks in, you should compensate. But part of you is not going to believe the training because this kill is personal. Take a deep breath. You only need one shot. Make it count.
What's interesting about looking at movies for me is I remember all the nonsense that goes on before the take and after, rather than what's happening on the screen. I'll tell you something, and nobody's noticed it, but I do every time. When the Bond film comes in, it goes da-da-da-da-da-da, and then the character comes through, fires the gun at the lens. It's not me. For the first few, it was Bob Simmons, the stunt man, and every time I see it, I always think it's funny.
There's always been a desire from the public to have a James Bond, because I think, you know, with all the technology and everything, basically it always does come down to a man risking his life, you know, on the ground.
So you've committed to quite a few more Bond films.
So they say.
On the grapevine.
So they say. I've yet to see the piece of paper. Of course, I have to. I have to sign a contract which commits me to. I think I'm committed to 4, which is including these 2. So in theory, it would be 2 more. That's as I understand it. But of course, I'm realistic about it. I mean, you know, things go wrong.
Mm.
You know, they might want to move on.
People always talk about getting trapped in a part and that sort of thing.
Too late, really. And I walked over that threshold a while ago. People say that all the time. They say, "You're worried about being typecast." I says, "Well, it genuinely is a very high-class problem to have, to be typecast as James Bond."
Yeah, but you've got an awful lot of work in your back pocket before you took this on.
I don't think I would have done it. I couldn't have done it if I hadn't done the stuff I'd done.
Your choice might seem to be very eclectic. You've been in some wonderful stuff.
Eclectic is a good word, is it?
I believe it. We'll change it. We'll redub this bit.
No,
your choice has been extraordinary.
Haphazard, I think, is the word you're looking for.
Right. Well, we try to be polite on the South Bank show. Do you think you will be not so much typecast as this will be something wanted? Yeah.
Yes, I think possibly, yes. Yeah. Success or failure, that's the way it is. But I understood that. I definitely understood that. I mean, whether I can cope with it, I don't know, but I thought it through before I took the job. I'm not turning down scripts because of this. I'm trying to steer clear of spy roles, but I mean, that's apart from that, I'm available. The name's Bond. James Bond.
Well, tomorrow night here on ITV1, Mark Austin reports on the disappearance of Lucy Blackman in 2000, who was working in Tokyo. That's For Real Crime at 9. Coming up next, there are mind games going on in Numbers.
There's not enough for the both of us, it seems. So I wish I was James Bond, just for the day.